The banquet hall at Ridgewood Golf and Country Club had a dress code posted right there on the door. Smart casual. I'd worn my good gray slacks and my blue button-down, the one my wife had ironed before she passed. I thought I looked fine. I thought I looked like somebody's father. I was wrong, apparently. The young woman at the welcome table couldn't have been more than 25, wearing a headset and a clipboard like she was coordinating a moon landing, looked me up and down so fast I almost missed it. Almost. "This evening is for corporate partners and their families," she said, smiling the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Are you on the guest list?" "My son invited me," I said. "His name is on there." His wife organized the table. She scrolled some more. "I'm sorry, sir. The family seating section for that table is already at capacity. I can put you in the general overflow section near the back." I stood there for a moment. The lobby behind her was full of people in blazers and cocktail dresses, laughing, holding champagne flutes. I could see the main hall through the open double doors, round tables with white linens and little flickering candles, the kind of setup that probably cost more per head than I made in a week when I was 30. My son was in there somewhere. My daughter-in-law, Renata, who had organized this whole evening, and my grandson, Caleb, who was about to receive the Regional Youth Volunteer of the Year award in front of 300 people. I'd driven 2.5 hours from Sudbury to be here. "Overflow section," I repeated. "It's just near the back," she said. "Still a lovely view." I picked up my name tag from the table. They'd at least printed one for me, and I walked to the overflow section near the back. "My name is Dennis Kowalczyk. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years working for a waste management company out of Sudbury, Ontario, driving collection trucks, supervising routes, then managing a depot of about 40 drivers by the time I retired 3 years ago. It was not glamorous work. I've heard every joke there is. I've smiled through most of them. My late wife, Carol, used to say that the city runs on garbage men, and she meant it as the highest compliment. She was a practical woman. She grew up on a farm outside Timmins, and she never forgot what real work looked like. Our son, Nathan, did not inherit that outlook. I say that without bitterness, or at least I try to. Nathan is smart. Always was. He got into the University of Ottawa on scholarship, studied business, met Renata in his 3rd year. Renata's family is from the west end of Toronto, the kind of neighborhood where the houses have names instead of numbers. Her father is a semi-retired lawyer. Her mother runs a consulting firm. They are lovely people, genuinely in small doses. Nathan works in commercial real estate now. Makes very good money. Lives in a semi-detached in Oakville. Nice street, 3-car garage between them and the neighbors, a mudroom the size of my first apartment. And Caleb, their boy, my grandson, is 13 years old and somehow the most grounded kid I've ever met. Don't know how that happened. Maybe you skip a generation sometimes. I sat down at the overflow table. There were 4 other people already there. 2 older women who seemed to be together. A man about my age in a plaid jacket who nodded at me, and a teenager on his phone who didn't look up. I nodded back at the man in plaid. He gestured toward the room. "You with someone up front?" he asked. "My son's table," I said. He nodded slowly. "Mine too, daughter. Same thing every year." He extended his hand. "Phil Dennis." Phil, I learned, had worked for Canada Post for 28 years. His daughter was a commercial architect. He made the drive from Kingston to Toronto 4 times a year for various family events, and about half those times, he said, he ended up in some version of the overflow section. "The trick," he said, "is to get yourself a good seat with a sightline to the stage. Back left corner's not bad here." I looked. He was right. You could see the podium clearly from where we were sitting. The ceremony started. A man in a very fitted suit welcomed everyone, talked about the foundation, talked about the corporate sponsors. Renata's company, she works in nonprofit development, was one of them. Her name was on the back of the program under Gold Partners. I looked down at the program. Caleb's name was listed under Youth Honorees. There was a short bio. Caleb is a grade 8 student at St. Andrew's College in Aurora, who has volunteered over 400 hours at the Oakville Food Bank and organized 2 community clothing drives. The bio didn't mention his family, just him and his work. I felt something loosen in my chest when I read that. I should tell you about the last time I saw Nathan and Renata together, about 3 weeks before this evening. I'd come down to Oakville on a Saturday. Nathan had mentioned, and I want to be fair, he had mentioned, casually, on the phone, that Renata had some people coming over for a late lunch. Friends from their neighborhood, a couple from their firm. I wasn't entirely sure. I pulled into the driveway and walked up to the door. I was wearing my everyday jacket, a good Columbia fleece, not fancy but warm, bought on sale at Canadian Tire last fall. Carol had given me grief for buying clothes at Canadian Tire. I missed that grief. The lunch was already going when I walked in. 6 or 7 adults around the kitchen island, wine open, charcuterie boards, the kind with the little honey dippers and the dried fruit arranged like a magazine spread. Nathan was in the middle of a story, and he looked up when I came in. He did not stop the story. Just a second, and finished his anecdote. Everyone laughed. He's good at stories. Then he came over and shook my hand. Not a hug, a handshake. "Hey, glad you made it," he said. And then, turning to the group, "Everyone, this is Dennis. He drove down from Sudbury." That was it, Dennis. He drove down from Sudbury. Not my dad, not my father, just Dennis, who apparently commutes. One of the women at the island said, "Oh, Sudbury, do you work up there?" "Retired," I said. "Waste management." There was a small pause. The particular silence of people deciding how to respond to something they consider unimpressive. Nathan jumped in fast. "So who wants more of the manchego?" he said, and the conversation moved on. And I stood there for a moment holding a glass of sparkling water I'd poured myself from the fridge. I didn't make a scene. I never make scenes. My father raised me to believe that how you handle embarrassment says more about you than the person who caused it. So I stayed for 2 hours, talked to Phil, a different Phil, Nathan's neighbor, a pleasant enough man who worked in insurance, ate some of the charcuterie, helped myself to coffee, and drove back to Sudbury. I did not bring it up with Nathan. I told myself it wasn't worth it. But it stays with you. Things like that stay with you, even when you tell yourself they don't. The awards ceremony moved through its first few categories. Phil, my new friend Phil from Kingston, had produced a thermos of tea from somewhere inside his jacket and offered me some. I accepted. "You do this often?" I asked him. "Define often," he said. We watched a young woman accept an award for environmental advocacy. We watched 2 men in their 30s receive something for community business development. The room applauded warmly, efficiently, and moved on. Then the MC said, "And now for our youth honoree in community service. This young man at just 13 years old has contributed more hours to his community than many adults twice his age." I sat up straighter. Caleb is not just a volunteer. He is, according to the food bank's executive director, the most reliable person on our roster of any age. He doesn't just show up, he organizes, he recruits, he follows up. Last November, when a planned clothing drive was almost canceled due to a venue issue, Caleb found an alternative location, recontacted all the donors himself, and delivered over 300 winter coats to families in need. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Caleb. I watched my grandson walk up to the stage. He was wearing a blazer that was slightly too big for him, probably borrowed from a cousin or rented for the occasion, and his hair was combed down in a way I recognized, because Carol used to do the same thing to Nathan's hair when he was small. He stood at the microphone and he looked out at the room, and he didn't look nervous. He looked like he belonged there. He thanked the food bank. He thanked his teachers. He said something funny about the clothing drive venue disaster that made the room laugh. Genuinely laugh, not the polite kind. He said he'd learned from it that a plan is just the first draft. And then he paused. "I also want to thank my grandfather," he said. "He's here tonight. He drove 2.5 hours from Sudbury." I felt Phil look at me sideways. "He's a retired waste management supervisor," Caleb continued. "And he taught me something important, which is that the most valuable work is the work that nobody claps for. Nobody claps when the garbage gets picked up. They just notice when it doesn't." The room was quiet for a second, genuinely quiet, not the awkward kind. Then they applauded. And somewhere near the front, I watched my son Nathan very slowly set down his champagne flute. Caleb found me immediately after the ceremony. He came straight to the back of the room, didn't stop to talk to any of the adults who were clearly trying to congratulate him, and he walked up to our overflow table and said, "Grandpa, you made it." I stood up, and I hugged him, and I didn't try to say anything, because I didn't trust my voice right then. "Sorry you got stuck back here," he said, pulling back and looking at me with this expression. Half sheepish, half amused. That was so completely Carol's expression I had to look away for a second. "Back left corner," I said. "Best sightline in the house." Phil raised his thermos. Can confirm. Caleb laughed. He sat down at our overflow table and talked to Phil and me for 20 minutes. He wanted to know about Phil's career at Canada Post, and he asked actual questions, follow-up questions, the kind that tell you someone's actually listening. Phil, I noticed, sat up a little taller. Nathan came over eventually. He had Renata with him, and another couple I didn't recognize. He looked at Caleb, and then at me, and then at the back corner table we were sitting at, and something crossed his face. Something I'd describe as calculation, the kind of look I'd seen when he was young and trying to work out whether he was in trouble. Dad, he said, I'm sorry about the seating mix-up. Renata didn't realize there was a capacity issue. It's fine, I said. I had a good seat. Renata said, we should have confirmed with the venue. She was looking at me steadily. She's always been direct, I'll give her that. It wasn't right. I'm sorry. I nodded. I meant the nod. Caleb said, I told them to put Grandpa at our table, by the way. I put it in the form they sent. He said it without accusation, just fact. Someone made a mistake. The other couple had drifted away. Nathan looked at his son. Then he looked at me. The speech was good, Nathan said, and he wasn't talking to Caleb. I didn't say anything for a moment. He's been listening, I finally said. I haven't done much. He did the work. Nathan nodded. He put his hands in his pockets the way he used to do when he was a teenager and didn't know what to do with himself. He looked, just for a second, like the kid I used to drive to hockey practice at 5:30 in the morning, half asleep in the back seat, his equipment smelling like cold rubber and determination, eating a granola bar I'd packed the night before. I know, he said. I know he has. We went for dinner after, not at the country club, just the four of us at a roadie place. Caleb picked on his phone because he'd read the reviews and declared it objectively superior. The tablecloths were plastic. They brought mango lassi in plastic cups. Caleb ate 2 full plates and spent the entire meal explaining to Renata's confused expression why roti canai was technically different from the roti they'd had at the fusion place in Mississauga. Nathan sat across from me and at one point, unprompted, started telling a story about a time when he was about 11, and he'd decided to help me on a Saturday route, unofficial, completely not allowed, but I'd let him come along because he'd begged for weeks. He talked about the size of the truck, the hydraulics, the way you had to stand a certain way when the compression started. He remembered things I'd forgotten. He remembered the name of foreman who'd waved us through without asking questions. Gustavo, he said. He always had a coffee in each hand. One for the road and one for backup, I said. He said he'd never been caught without coffee twice. Nathan laughed. Real laughter, the loose kind, the kind that doesn't have an audience. I used to tell people at school that I'd driven a garbage truck, he said. You didn't drive it. You rode in it. I told people I'd driven it. I looked at my son across a plastic tablecloth in a roadie shop in Oakville at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night, and I thought, there you are. We split the bill. Nathan tried to cover it, and I put my card down at the same time, and Caleb, quick as anything, put his hand over both our cards and said, I have a gift card for my birthday. It's my treat. He'd been saving a $50 gift card from Grandma Carol's last birthday, the one she'd put in an envelope the previous February, 6 weeks before she died. The bill came to $43. Caleb left a $7 tip and looked extremely satisfied with himself. I drove back to Sudbury the next morning. Left at 7, before anyone else was up, stopped at a Tim Hortons outside Barrie for a large double-double and a bagel. The kind of breakfast Carol always teased me about. 60 years old and you still eat like you're on a night shift, she used to say. I sat in the parking lot for a bit before getting back on the 400. I've been thinking about what my grandson said at that podium. The most valuable work is the work nobody claps for. And I've been trying to figure out if I actually said that to him, or if he arrived at it on his own and was being generous by crediting me. I honestly can't remember saying it, not in those exact words. I said things like it, probably. You say things to kids and you never know which ones stick. What I do know is that I spent 31 years doing work that people found easy to dismiss. I never had a business card that impressed anyone at a cocktail party. I never wore a suit to the office. I came home smelling like a job that had to be done, and I ate dinner with my wife, and we talked about our day, and we paid the mortgage, and we raised our son, and we put him through school, and somewhere along the way my son got lost for a little while. He found a different world, a shinier one. And he looked back at the one he'd come from and felt something he probably can't name even now. Shame, maybe. Or maybe just the discomfort of contrast. The feeling of not being able to reconcile two things that don't fit neatly together. I don't blame him entirely. The world does that to people. Tells them that where they came from determines where they're going, and that the only direction is up, and that up looks a very specific way. But my grandson stood at a microphone in front of 300 people and said, "The work nobody claps for matters." He said it without embarrassment. He said it like it was obvious. Nathan heard it. I saw his face when he heard it. I think something shifted for him that night. I don't know how permanent it is. I don't know if one evening repairs years of small distances. Probably not, all at once. These things take time, and they take repetition, and they take the willingness to be uncomfortable. But I think he's willing. I think something in him was always willing. It just needed his 13-year-old son to say the quiet part out loud. The 400 was clear all the way north. I got home by noon, fed the cat, made a sandwich, and sat at my kitchen table, the old oak one Carol and I bought at a garage sale in 1989, the one with the wobbly leg I've fixed 17 times and refused to replace, and I ate my lunch in the quiet of a Thursday afternoon in Sudbury. It was a good afternoon. Some things take a long time to arrive, but they arrive.